Now to make our jalapeno, or as some would have it, CapsImel wine, we will be using the following. I've got 8 jalapeno peppers. You can add as many as 16 if you want it a little bit more spicy. I'm going to have 4.5 cups at the ready. Not quite sure how much of this I'm going to use until I've taken my initial hydrometer reading, but I know I'm going to need at least 4.5 cups. I need 1 pound, or in this case 15 ounces, of seedless golden raisins. We'll need the juice of 1/4 of a lemon, and that's going to act as our acid blend substitute, which will add a little brightness to the wine, a little bit of acidity. We need 1 black tea bag, and that's going to act as our tannin substitute. That's going to provide a little bit of astringency on the back end of our wine. This time around, I'm going to be using a Red Star Premier Blanc wine yeast. And the reason for this choice is that it has a higher 18% ABV, alcohol by volume tolerance. Hey, if I'm going to make something that's hot and spicy, I might as well make it with a little bit of a kick. Now, if you don't have that, this still works. Now, we're going to use a 1/2 teaspoon of original active dry yeast to act as our yeast nutrient. Turns out that regular wine yeast will feed upon the dead carcasses of the bread yeast and makes a better end result wine. We need to have at least 1 gallon of filtered water ready. We won't be using all of that because the sugar that we need to dissolve in that water later on is going to take up some of the volume, but at least have 1 gallon ready. Going to need at least 1 straining bag. Since we'll be dealing with fresh peppers, we need something to put them in during primary fermentation, so 1 straining bag will do. Now, because we are dealing with straining bags, we need a fermenter with a wide mouth opening so we can get our straining bag into. After about a week of sitting in our primary fermenter, we eventually want to transfer everything over into our secondary carboy for the long haul fermentation process. And again, it doesn't require a wide mouth opening, just a narrow opening will do. That having been said, we are going to need an airlock with bung that will fit into our carboy to allow CO2 gases to escape and keep the bugs from getting in. I should point out that our primary fermenter does have a built-in airlock. So if yours doesn't, then you'll need an airlock for your primary fermenter as well. It would be helpful if you have a hydrometer testing tool to determine what our final alcohol by volume content is going to be. It's optional, but it's nice to have. Now, one thing that you do not see here is that 8-quart pot, because I don't have the space in this frame to include it, that we'll be using shortly to help kill the bacteria and any wild yeast that might be on our peppers. And once again, as I'm fond of saying, last but certainly not least, is a food-grade sanitizer to make sure that all of our equipment has been properly cleaned and sanitized, whether it be One-Steps, Darsan, or something equivalent. That is what I'm going to be using to make this wine. All right, let's start out by removing the seeds from our jalapenos. Go ahead and remove the upper part, and let's do a slice in half. And what we need to do now is to remove these seeds. Now, if you want your wine hotter, you can go ahead and heat the seeds in. But for this time around, we're just going to go ahead and remove them. And once the seeds have been removed, and some of the stem in the side, we can go ahead and finely chop our peppers. Now, if you happen to have a food processor, go for it. But we just want to finely chop. And let's go ahead and get that into a straining bag. Let's start with the rest of them. All right, let's move on to those raisins. Now with the raisins, I'm going to just give those a rough chop. If your straining bag is a little bit on the small side, like mine are, we want to use a second straining bag. And let's get those in the bag. All right, let's go ahead and tie off our bags. And let's move on to the kitchen. All right, since we're going to be putting in 4.5 cups of sugar, and we're making roughly a 1-gallon batch, I'm going to go ahead and pour off about 4 cups of our water. And the remainder, we can go ahead and put in the pot. Put our lid back on, and let's bring that up to a boil. All right, now that our water has come to a good rolling boil, we can go ahead and incorporate our sugar. Get that all nice and dissolved. Won't take but a few seconds. We're going to go ahead and, since our water is still nice and hot, add in our 1/2 teaspoon of bread yeast / yeast nutrient substitute. And while we're at it, we can drop in our black tea bag / tannin substitute. We can now turn off the heat, and we can drop in our peppers and our raisins. Go ahead and put our lid back on and wait for that to come down to room temperature. Now again, the water that we poured off, when we transfer all of our liquid into our carboy, we will bring it up to the 1-gallon measure, and if necessary, any additional water that we need to add, we'll go ahead and bring it to level. So again, let's just wait for this to come down to room temperature. All right, I've taken the opportunity to pour the juice from the pot into our carboy. Then, using some of the remaining water that we had set aside earlier, I brought the juice level up to the 1-gallon mark. Then I added our straining bags, and now I'm going to add the juice of 1/4 of a lemon. And using a strainer, trying to ensure that I don't get any seeds in there. I mean, you just need to squeeze it. You don't need to scrape off the sides or anything. You don't need to ream it or anything. But that's more than enough to get the job done. Now that we've got all our liquids in place, it's now time to do a hydrometer reading. For those of you who have hydrometers, my reading came in at 1.112. They're high. It kind of tells me that it's either going to be a very potent wine in terms of ABV, alcohol by volume, or it's going to be a sweet wine. Time will tell on that. All right, now that using a freshly sanitized spoon, I'm going to go ahead and give our juice one last good vigorous stir. The news after that is that we want to try and give our yeast, to be added momentarily, a little bit more oxygen to work with, at least initially. All right. More is better, but that will do for now. Following that, we want to add in our 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. You can add more if you like, but I find that a 1/4 teaspoon will get the job done eventually. I'll spread it around. And because some of it's sitting on those stringing bags, I want to go ahead and just incorporate that a little bit. I mean, if you want to hydrate your yeast beforehand, you can go ahead and do that as well. But for me, this method does work, and that's the method that I use. Go ahead and put a lid back on, nice and tight. And once again, I should point out, this fermenter does have the built-in airlock, which is the red thing right here. Yours doesn't have it. You need to use a regular airlock. Okay, it's now time to label our creation. We are making, get this on straight, a jalapeno wine. We started it on this date. In our original gravity, or starting gravity, or starting gravity was 1.112. All right, this gets the process started, but there's still quite a few things that need to be done following this over the course of the next year. We're going to let the jalapeno peppers and raisins, we're going to let those sit in the primary fermenter for a good 5 to 7 days. After which we'll have remove those, and we will transfer our wort, or wine to be, into our secondary carboy for the longer haul. And then periodically, every 6 or 8 weeks or so, we'll continue to do the process of racking or transferring from one carboy to another until the wine has either become clear or it's to our liking in terms of taste. I usually wait about 8 or 9 months before I bottle, and that whole process involves degassing, back sweetening, pasteurization, then the whole bottling process of putting them in bottles, corking them, labeling them. It's a fairly involved process from time to time, but there we go. This is the initial process of getting a jalapeno wine started. There will be a part 2 video when I do the tasting in 1 year's time. So until then, click on that subscribe, notify button, and I will see you then.